As you're working on your literature review number 2, one of the things that a lot of people are going to benefit from is having better organization in their writing process than they have in the past. So that is what I'm going to talk about today. So the first thing you're going to do in your writing process is you're going to do your research. In my experience, this often takes up to half of my time. And when I allow myself that time for good research, I am writing, the actual writing is a breeze and it goes very smoothly. If I am trying to do my research and my writing at the same time, it's harder to write a good paper because I don't know what all of the sources say before I'm actually trying to write about them. And that can result in having a poorly organized paper. So when I'm doing research, the first thing that I'm going to do, this is just an example if I were writing a paper about learning strategies that can help college students do better in school. So these are the keywords that I used. And you can see here that I did college students or university students or undergraduates. And so this gave me the results from all of them. So what I would do first is look at the titles. Once I think this is a good title, I'm going to read the abstract. And that will give me a summary of kind of the main points of the paper. And if it was a study, it'll tell me some of the main details that I need to know about the study. So after reading the abstract, I think it's a good article. It fits into my paper. So I'm going to click. These will usually start out blue. So I'm going to click on this and I'm going to add that to my folder. Now your folder is not going to save unless you're signed into the library website, so remember to sign in. But if you're doing your research off campus, you have to sign in, so you don't have to worry about it as much. So if I'm going through here, I'm clicking on the ones that I think are really interesting and valuable for my research, and I put them all in this folder. Another thing that I might notice as I'm looking at these titles is they don't say goal setting right in the title, but this one says self-regulation. This one says self-regulated learning strategies. So that gives me an idea of something I could do. So I might change this from learning strategies to self-regulation. And instead of regulate or regulation, I'm just going to do the asterisk because that'll give me regulate, regulatory, regulating, regulation. And then I'll do another search and see, look, it's pulling up 59. So there are a lot of, and I might change that to learning, but it's pulling up more results that I wouldn't have gotten before because I've found another keyword that shows up in a lot of my goal setting articles. So after I have collected the ones that I am interested in, I can go to this folder, I can print them, email, save as a file, export. So I can have access to all of these, and it's much easier than, or at least a little bit easier than pulling up the PDF and saving it individually. Okay, so once I have done that, I'm going to actually start reading the articles. I will probably, if I were writing a paper, I would probably choose more than 10 because you have to have 10 sources. I would probably choose 12 or 15 sources that I think sound good for me to start reading. And then I would read them. I would read them before I wrote my abstract or before I wrote my annotated bibliography because I have to read them anyway. And if I read them in to completion before I write the annotated bibliography, I get a lot better idea of how I can use them in my paper, and I allow my sources to shape my paper. So that is one of the things that can help you a lot as you're preparing for this paper. The other thing is I'll take notes. I personally print out my articles, and I know it's a waste of paper. I always recycle it when I'm done, but I take notes, I highlight or underline right in it, and I write. By annotations here, I just mean I write myself little notes on the side. Annotation can either mean little notes on the side, or it can refer to a more formal annotation that you do in a bibliography. So there are two meanings for that word. So that is what I do, and by the time I get done with this, I am already pretty confident with my outline. When I write an outline, I will write my thesis right at the very top of the page. Here's an example of something that is a thesis that you might use for this kind of a paper. As researchers have looked for a solution for X, their policy suggestions usually fall into 4 main categories, and then I would give them 1, 2, 3, and 4. After briefly discussing the background information, I will explain each of these possible changes. So this is my forecast statement. I am forecasting the organization. So I'm saying the first thing I'm going to do is give you background information. And if I actually were writing a paper, I would tell you what I meant by background information. I would say you need a strong understanding of the history of this, or you need to understand, as you research, you're going to realize, oh, my audience who are not experts on this probably won't know these things. And you'll include those not in your introduction paragraph, but in a background information section before you get into the main body. Sometimes that you don't even need a background section. So a lot of times you do. So then, and when I say I'll explain each of these possible changes, I could even go more into depth here. I might say so here are the 4 main categories. I'm going to explain each one of the main categories, and I will give pros and cons of each, or something. So you can make your forecasting statement. I mean, in my papers, I've even had a forecasting statement that was up to a paragraph long. I'm talking about like a 15-page paper, but I want to be really specific about my methodology, about the focus of my paper, because if I give that to my audience in advance, they're going to feel a lot more comfortable as they're reading the rest of the paper because they know what's coming. It's not going to come as a surprise. And that's part of the research paper or the academic paper genre. That's not necessarily the case for lots of other genres. You probably won't do a forecast statement if you're giving an opinion editorial, or if you are doing, a more creative piece. But for this kind of paper, this is expected and it is very helpful for your audience. So then after I've done that, and I might change this as I might actually change some aspects of my thesis after I've started writing the paper if I realize that it's going in a different direction. But I'm definitely going to start with something that gives me an idea of what I want to write. And then I will just split it up, topic 1, topic 2, however many topics I have in my paper. And I'm going to write down what are the most important things that I don't want to forget, and which of my sources talked about that topic. A lot of the students in the previous paper just did kind of a summary of each source. So they had 7 sources, so they had 7 body paragraphs, and then did kind of a transition sentence in between. That is a strategy you can use, but this one is probably a stronger organization strategy because it allows you to recognize that more than one source weighs in on the topics that you have identified. It also gives you the opportunity to think more deeply about the topic and how you want to define it. So this is the strategy for organization that I would recommend. So there are lots of different ways you can organize your paragraphs. You can go chronologically. If you're saying when researchers started looking at this issue, here were some of the first solutions they gave. Since that time, there have been other ones. And You could do it chronologically that way. You could do simplest to most complex. You could do it in order of disagreement. So this person said this, the next person disagreed and said this instead, and the next person did a combination of both. Those are just some of the ways, but as you are doing careful research and writing your annotated bibliography, that is a great opportunity for you to think through your organizational strategy, and it honestly could be different for every paper. I have heard in the past that sometimes people want to save their strongest paragraph for last. I did that a lot when I was in high school and maybe the beginning of college, and a lot of you are at the beginning of college, so you can do that. But as I became a better writer, I learned that I shouldn't have any weak paragraphs, and so they should all be strong. And so I don't organize that way anymore. Don't forget that to present a balanced paper, you should spend roughly the same number of pages on each topic. So sometimes my students find as they're researching that they find a lot more sources for one of their subtopics than the other ones. So they end up spending, say the body of their paper is like 6 pages. That's not including the introduction or the conclusion. And they'll spend 4 on the one that had the most research and only 2 on the other one. That comes off as an unbalanced paper. It can come off as biased, or like as if you're trying to persuade your audience when you're not supposed to be persuasive for this paper. And so you really want to be careful to be balanced. If you're having a hard time finding sources for one of your subtopics, you might have to switch the way that, like the angle that you're taking for this paper. And that's something that I noticed a lot as I was looking at topic proposals. A lot of people wanted to do something pro, or that had pro and con. So they would split their paper in half and they would do the first half pro and the second half con, or something like that. And to several people I made this comment, this issue is not pro and con. Or it may seem like it's pro or con, but you'll find that scholars don't believe that it is. That's something that you should recognize as you're writing a scholarly paper or an academic research paper. Sometimes the general public will think that there's a debate in a certain area, and they will have debate heavily pro-con on a certain issue when all of the scholars are pro or all of the scholars are con. And so that's a fine line that you have to be careful about when you walk. You're going to say, you may, in your introductory paragraph, do I talk about this? Yeah, scholars versus the general public. You may use your introductory paragraph to recognize that the general public isn't on the same page as scholars. This helps you build your ethos. You can say, I understand the general public doesn't realize, here's an example, many people in the general public don't realize that dogs have feelings. But scholars have reached a consensus about this issue. If you look at it online, you know, because I did the research this morning, that there are no scholars that say dogs do not have feelings. What scholars are looking at is, how do animals exhibit their feelings? Or how does human behavior change the feelings of animals, or something like that? So you might mention that the general public has a different debate going on than the scholars, but then in the body of your paper, you are speaking as an expert, and you are going to enter the conversation talking about the expert conversation, because you want to have scholarly articles on both sides of the issue. If you have all of your scholarly articles on one side and your other side is just your 2 substantive articles, that is going to make for a much weaker paper. Okay, and I want to do a quick review on citations, so these 2 are from a paper that I wrote, And as you can see in these 3 citations, I included the author's last name. That is because I hadn't written the author's name in my sentence, so I needed it here. Whereas in this one, I have the title and the author. That's why I do not